All right, good morning. If you're just joining us, good to see you. Good to see all those faces out there, even if you're there virtually. So it's going to be a great day. So let me just, I'm going to make this statement. It's easy to be optimistic and to fight hard when things are going well. The real challenge is to be optimistic and fight hard when things are challenging. And right now, as we all know, things are challenging. It's a very challenging time, not only in terms of just having to create new patterns, work invading the home invading work. But then you got all the challenges within our industry with COVID and the mandates. And then you look at the economic challenges. You got all of these challenges that are layered on top of one another. It is a very challenging time. So I go back to that statement. It's easy to be optimistic and fight when things are going well. The real proof in terms of who we are is really, how do we respond when things are challenging? You know, and these are challenging times. So how are you responding? You know, we see this in other people. We watch other people and how they respond. Some not so well, some exceptionally well. We see it in ourselves. How are you responding? You know, several years ago, I was on a trip to New York, a vacation. I like to go at least once, if not twice a year. One of my favorite places to go. And really the reason is because, as this story will demonstrate, I love just all of the buildings, just seeing those buildings, seeing the immensity of it, the power of it. And I'm standing there just looking up, and I don't remember where I was, just in the sea of buildings. You know, New York has somewhere between 5,000 and 6,000 buildings, that's mind-blowing. It's mind-boggling. And I'm standing there in the sea of buildings, and I'm looking up there. And as I look up, I look over to my left and right, and I see somebody standing there kind of looking around as well. And I could tell they were a tourist. And I said, hey, you know, we were talking, where you're from and so forth. And I finally got to the question. And the question was this. I said, when you look at these buildings, what do you see? And he looked up there for a second and really pondered the question. And he looked back at me and said, I don't know, I guess I see concrete and steel and architecture. And I looked at him and I said, okay, but I was kind of disappointed in the answer. And I said, really, that's what you see? And he said, well, what do you see? And I said, well, I see those things, but I see beyond that. What I see is a lot of hard work, a lot of disappointment, a lot of challenge, a lot of fight, a lot of determination, a lot of sacrifice. That's what I see when I look at those buildings in New York. I mean, you think about it. You think about what it takes. We know this, what it takes to design a home and to build a home, and all the mistakes that can be made and all the challenges. And oftentimes these transactions do not come to an end, you know, a successful end. They come to an early termination. It is so difficult to bring just together a simple residential construction project, just a single home, let alone to look at these buildings that are hundreds of thousands or millions of square feet. Some of these projects, millions, with multiple buildings. In fact, if you look at Rockefeller Center in New York, I don't remember, but it's something like 13, 14, 15, 16, I mean, in the teens, the number of buildings that were built. And that project, really, if history were to have its way, shouldn't be there. I wasn't intending on telling the story, but I'll just be very quick about it because it's not my main point. But John D. Rockefeller inherited a massive fortune from his father, John D. Rockefeller Sr. And in the 1920s, John D. Rockefeller Jr. had this idea of building what was called eventually, and is called today, Rockefeller Center. But he picked one of the most inopportune times to decide to build it. It was the end of the 1920s, just before the Great Depression, when the stock market crashed in 1929. And he'd had everything set up, the city approved, all of the city fathers and so many of the influential people and organizations approved of this project. They were very excited. And then the stock market crashed, and the beginning of what became known as the Great Depression started. And here's John D. Rockefeller Jr. He's in a position where he's either going to be the trust fund baby who never did anything. And obviously he had graduated from that, having this idea to build this project. But many people could have done it, arguably, given that things were going well, that life wasn't challenging. It was the roaring 20s. Things were great. The economy was booming. The nation was booming. You know, it was post-World War I. Things were going well. It was easy to be optimistic. It was easy to be a fighter. But here we are, 1929, and then the stock market crashes. And so here's John D. Rockefeller. He can either choose to be the fighter or visionary who history would look at and say was brilliant, or he could be the idiot who lost his father's fortune, the greatest fortune that had ever been created up to that point in the nation's history. See, that's where he was. He was on the verge of losing the entire thing if he moved forward with this project, because all the banks said, we're not going to fund it. You're going to have to do it. And he had a choice. And ultimately, he chose to use his personal fortune to fund the entire project. Well, as we all know, today, it was a very, very successful project. It stands today and is one of the iconic projects, not only in New York, but quite frankly in the world, because of the story behind it, because of the timing, because of the challenge, because many people said, don't do it. They said, absolutely don't do it. It won't work. You're going to lose everything. And that's not going to be a fun experience. Well, nevertheless, he moved forward. And what is interesting is that he created a legacy that that will be remembered for centuries, quite frankly. Those buildings, you know, they're coming up on 100 years of being there. It's crazy, and people still know. If you go to Rockefeller Center, you'll see a memorial, and one of the best quotes that I've ever read. If you have not read it, the monument at Rockefeller Center that sits right there adjacent to the ice skating rink. It's a great testament to the belief and the faith of John D. Rockefeller Jr. I would encourage you to look it up. If you just do John D. Rockefeller quote, Rockefeller Center, you'll find it. It is a very inspiring quote. So really what I wanted to share with you this morning were two stories, because I really want to talk about a legacy and what legacy you're going to leave. And my opening statement about things are challenging and how are you going to respond really relates to that. See, this is an opportunity for all of us to really prove what sort of legacy we're going to leave for those we affect, not only our families, but those around us. I'm going to share with you a story about a gentleman by the name of Easy Eddie. Easy Eddie was a man who worked for one of the most notorious mobsters in history, Al Capone. Al Capone was known to bring to the city of Chicago prostitution and bootlegging and murder at wholesale levels. I mean, I think that if you go back and look, it would be argued that Al Capone single-handedly controlled and operated those two businesses, prostitution and bootlegging, in the 1920s and 30s in Chicago. And of course, in the process of doing that, murdered many, many people. Well, Eddie was given the nickname Easy Eddie because he made it look so easy to keep Al Capone out of jail. He did it over and over and over again, despite the fact that people knew that Al Capone was guilty. Easy Eddie was so good at what he did that Al Capone paid him exceptionally well. In addition to paying him well, he also set him up in an estate in downtown Chicago that literally, guys and gals, occupied an entire city block. That was the size of the house and the estate that Easy Eddie and his family occupied. And as bad as Easy Eddie was, representing this notorious murderous mobster, he had a soft spot. His soft spot was his son. And he gave his son the best clothes, the best education, when he was old enough, the best cars. This kid didn't want for anything. Well, despite Easy Eddie's success, there were two things that he couldn't give his son. He couldn't give him a good name, and he couldn't give him a good example, being who he was. And for whatever reason, Eddie got to a point where he had to decide. He wanted to decide to do something different. Apparently, he had a conscience. And he decided that he was going to rectify the name and be a good example for his son, to really have some integrity. So what he decided to do, he decided to snitch on the mob. He decided to snitch on Al Capone. And that's exactly what he did. He testified against Al Capone with the FBI. Elliot Ness, you may know the story. I think it was Kevin Costner who played it, and played the role of Elliot Ness. Well, it was Easy Eddie who gave up the evidence that caused Al Capone eventually to be convicted and to go to jail, and it brought down his reign of terror and his era. Well, shortly after Easy Eddie snitched on Al Capone, he found himself on a very quiet Chicago street and was accosted by unknown assailants, and he was shot multiple times and killed. And on his personal effects, they found a crucifix, a religious medallion, and a rosary, but they also found a poem. I want to read this poem to you. It reads, "The clock of life is wound but once, and no man has the power to tell just when the hands will stop, at late or early hour. Now is the only time you own. Live, love, toil with a will. Place no faith in time, for the clock may soon be still." They found that in his breast pocket in his suit when he was murdered. It's interesting. That man, Easy Eddie, who obviously was living a life that none of us would want to emulate and had a reputation that none of us would want to have, took the decision to recreate his name and his legacy and to give his son a good name and a great example. I want to share with you a second story here because they're related. So World War II produced a ton of heroes. And this man, Lieutenant Commander Butch O'Hare, was no exception. He was a fighter pilot on the USS Lexington, which is or was an aircraft carrier. And Lieutenant Commander O'Hare was the first naval fighter to ever become an ace, a fighting ace. And he was also the first naval fighter to win the Congressional Medal of Honor, or I shouldn't say win it, he earned it. And an amazing man. And the story I want to share with you is that on one day, the squadron that he was in, he did not lead it. The entire squadron for the entire aircraft carrier was dispatched on a mission. And as they got into the air, Lieutenant Commander O'Hare checked his fuel gauge and realized that his fuel was low. They had forgotten to refuel his particular plane. Well, he advised the squadron leader, and when the squadron leader found out, he said, you can't go, you got to turn around because you won't make it. Well, he kept insisting that he wanted to go, and the squadron leader said, no, you're not going. And the squadron leader won out, fortunately. And so as Lieutenant Commander O'Hare turned around and traveled, I don't know how many miles, but many, many miles back towards the Lexington, he accidentally, not intentionally, came across a squadron of Japanese Zeros fighters. And they were headed directly towards the USS Lexington. Now, I don't know if they were heading towards the Lexington specifically to attack it, or it was just simply in their path. And I don't know that the history books say what the deal was. But nevertheless, he came across the squadron, and he knew that if they stayed on their trajectory, they were going to come right up against the Lexington, which was virtually defenseless, because the entire squadron, the fighter planes that would be dispatched to address the Japanese Zeros, was gone. They had left. And so the only thing standing between the Lexington and the Japanese squadron was Lieutenant Commander Butch O'Hare. So he did what any hero would do. He went directly towards the sortie and surprise attacked them with both of his 50 caliber guns blazing. And he fought them so long that and evaded being hit by their machine guns, that eventually he ran completely out of bullets in those guns. And so then he resorted, instead of continuing to the Lexington, he resorted to continue to attack them by diving at them and trying to clip their wings, tail wings, or their side wings, to try to cause them to fall. Well, eventually the Japanese squadron, the sortie that was being flown, was in complete chaos, and they all scattered. Which, if you think about it, is amazing. One plane did that to the Japanese squadron. Well, when he got back to the USS Lexington and successfully landed, he told the story, and there were several people who did not believe this incredible story that one plane against an entire Japanese squadron prevented the squadron from arriving and attacking the Lexington and potentially sinking it. The good news is that even back in those days, the planes were fitted with cameras. And so they went back and watched the film. And in fact, they confirmed that Lieutenant Commander Butch O'Hare had shot down or caused to crash five Japanese planes during that dogfight, which is absolutely amazing. Well, about a year later, he was flying another mission, another sortie, and he was shot down over the Pacific. Well, his hometown, Chicago, not wanting their son to be forgotten, decided to name their airport after him. And so if you've ever been to Chicago, of course, you know that O'Hare Airport, that airport was named after this gentleman, Lieutenant Commander Butch O'Hare. Now, the reason I share that particular story with you is because Lieutenant Commander Butch O'Hare is not only a favorite son of Chicago, and his namesake being the airport in Chicago, but he is also the son of Easy Eddie, the attorney who represented and eventually turned on Al Capone. So I love that story. And it speaks to the idea of a legacy. Look, guys and gals, I know things are difficult right now. They are. They're difficult. They're difficult. They're difficult. Nobody would deny you that it's difficult, and nobody would deny you the opportunity to lick your wounds and say, I don't know what to do. I get that. But my question for you is, how are you going to respond in these challenging times? I want to share with you three possibilities. Three possibilities that I think that these people that I've talked about today exemplify. The first possibility is it is possible to fight. It's possible to fight. Whether we look at a John D. Rockefeller Jr. who chose to fight despite the challenges, despite the odds, despite the depression, despite everybody saying you can't do it, shouldn't do it, don't do it, he fought. If you look at Easy Eddie, he fought. He fought against Al Capone, the very man who created this life that he was living for his family, all the riches, the luxury, the protection, and ultimately his life. He gave that up. He fought. He fought for his name. He fought for his example for his son. He fought for integrity. You know, it's possible. It's possible to fight. You look at what Lieutenant Commander Butch O'Hare did. It's possible to fight and to win successfully. He fought. He shot down or caused to crash 5 different Japanese Zeros in that squadron and lived to tell about it. He fought. Ladies and gentlemen, it is possible to fight. It is possible. But the question is, for what? See, we have to know what we're going to fight for, because none of us will fight if we don't know what we're fighting for something or for someone. The second thing is this, in terms of its possibles. It is possible to change. It is possible to change. And I think the best example of the stories that we heard this morning is the example of Easy Eddie. It is easy to change. It's not easy to change, but it's possible. It was not easy for him to go from this life of luxury, this life of certainty, this life that he had created, that he had known for years, and to simply say, I'm not going to do that anymore. And in fact, I'm going to risk my very life out of principle, out of my name, out of my example for my son, out of principles of integrity, doing the right thing. That wasn't easy, but he changed. But here's the thing, he had a reason to do it. See, again, when we have something to fight for, we'll tend to fight. When we have something to change for, we'll tend to change. And the last thing is this, in terms of its possibles. It's possible to win. It's possible to win. Whether we look at a John D. Rockefeller who took all of that risk, despite all the challenges, and won. See, he was living through the Great Depression and stood alone. He was at the top. He couldn't look to anybody for help. It was him and him alone. And yet, he won. And you look at an Easy Eddie. In terms of what he wanted to accomplish, a name for him, for his son. An example that his son could look up to and live up to, which interestingly enough, he did. And fighting for integrity, fighting for principles, even if it meant ultimately, which he knew, that it would subject himself to possible murder, which it did. And then you look at Lieutenant Commander Butch O'Hare. It's possible to win. Despite the odds, it is possible to win. I get that it is challenging right now, and yet it is possible to fight, it is possible to change, and it is possible to win. And if you will believe that, because you have something to fight for, you have someone to fight for, or someone's people to fight for, or things to fight for, when you remember those people and those things, it's a lot easier to fight, to change, and to win. But you have to remember those things. See, it is easy to be optimistic and fight when things are difficult, or when things are easy, but it is challenging to do it when things are difficult. So we're going to have to find the reasons why, the people why, the things why. And if we will, I promise you, you'll be able to do it. Because each and every one of us is wired to be successful. We are. But what we have to do is we have to shift our focus from the challenge or challenges to the solutions, which oftentimes means just simply taking action. You know, they say that the journey of 1,000 steps starts with the first step. It does. So if you're feeling highly challenged right now, mentally, emotionally, physically, financially, take that first step. Figure out why you're going to fight, why you're going to change, and why you're going to win. Identify those people, identify those things. Because if you don't do that, you won't fight, you won't change, and you won't win. And yet, I know that you can. I have absolutely 100% faith that you can if you just simply will. So my question for you is, will you? Look, I hope that this message, these stories, which I find to be inspiring, were inspiring for you. I hope that they cause you, if you are challenged right now, or even if you're not, that they allow you to double down, to increase your commitment to your principles, to your goals, to who you want to be, the life that you want to live, and the inspiration that you should want to be and can be for other people, to go out there and lead other people, to make a difference in their lives, to contribute to their lives, to make this world better. That's why we're all here. So I've enjoyed our time together this morning. I'm looking forward to next time. Make this a great week. There are so many opportunities out there right now, despite what's going on. I'm hearing from so many of you, so many great victories. So remember that. It is a great opportunity right now. When the crowd's going one way, go the other direction. Don't be ordinary, ladies and gentlemen. Be extraordinary.